Welcome to the Common Creative Podcast. My name's Paul Fairweather.
And I'm Chris Meredith, and together with Paul, we're on a mission to unlock the secrets of creativity through ideas, stories, and visual cognition. And today we have an amazing guest, a kind of academic scientist of the world of creativity. Paul.
Yeah, I suppose you could say that. Interestingly, and that's not what I thought we were getting. I thought we were getting somebody put on Kids Place, but it was a lot more than that. Dave Brown has been for many years a creative director of young persons theatre and shows. Very fascinating. But in terms of this process that he's been going through in this sort of 50 odd year career, he's really developed some incredible insights into the creative process. And the 7 principles he's developed, which we got to eventually at the end, like 7 veils, one I think, was really like some stuff we've never heard before, Chris, or certainly not and really refreshing.
And a wonderful advert for the power of whimsy and how important it is to allow ourselves to be whimsical, to explore things where we don't know where we're going as an important part of the creative process. And so, yes, a person ostensibly is about kids' plays, which you might think are very lighthearted and very insubstantial, and it's backed up by, I think, some incredible insights about the science of creativity. What a wonderful guest.
It was fantastic. Let's get him in. Dave Brown, welcome to the Common Creative Podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. Looking forward to it.
Dave, it's a huge pleasure to have you on the show. I know that, I think, formally you're an artistic director, and I'll tell you, in truth, I'm not sure what that is, but could you tell us about yourself? Tell us your history. What brought you up to the point of being an artistic director? And then finish by telling us, what is an artistic director?
Oh, there you go. Look, when I was 1, I'd just begun. When I was 2, I was nearly new. But no, I was born in 1950. At the age of 7, you could find me producing the Davy Brown show in the chicken shed in the backyard with my cousins as the cast and the neighbours as the audience. And then at 14, I was writing a song cycle based on the Book of Revelations. I was a very sort of serious kid. At 21, I was doing an honours science degree majoring in biochemistry. Don't ask about that. At 28, I was a drama teacher in regional South Australia and directing my second original music theatre work. At 35, I founded Jumbuck Youth Music Theatre, working with professional artists and extraordinarily talented teenagers to create and present new music theatre works. So a lot of making. At 42, I became the artistic director of Patch Theatre, making professional theatre for young audiences. I stayed for over 2 decades in that company, co-creating 20 original works from scratch and touring them nationally and internationally. 21 years later, at the age of 70, I was 4 years into developing the Paper Boats, which is a co-creation and partnership platform for independent theatre makers. And as part of the activities of that platform, I began a new project with artistic associate John Bode, who's an opera singer and a comedian. And that project was called Sevenwell, in the process of making, which over the last 5 years has become a podcast documenting the making of itself. And that's still evolving with a range of companion projects.
I love a podcast about itself. But you did ask for the question, Dave, what is an artistic director?
God, it's whatever you want it to be. Really, it's a person who's a vision maker, a conceptualist, a person who brings together teams, creative teams to make work. In my case, to make theatre for young audiences, and in more recent times, to make podcasts and so on. So, yeah, an artistic director is an overseer, a visioner, an inspirer, a mentor, a mentee, all sorts of things. But really at the hub of the creative passion that generates creative outcomes.
Dave, I'm interested. Before we started, I think I said, now just to get this straight, you do kids theatre, and you basically made the very strong point that, you know, it's not about clown noses and stuff like this. This is serious.
Fart jokes, I think, is what you said.
Fart jokes is what I said. Yeah. Look, there's this common preconception that kids theatre is not worthy, and I would say that kids are the most important audiences you could probably perform for, and we make really sophisticated works. And in Adelaide, there are 3 internationally renowned companies that are all doing that sort of work. our process of making a theatre work is usually at least 2 years to make a work that takes 42 minutes to see, to view. And these works are enduring works. So because we spend so much time and effort and passion and persistence and perseverance making these works, they endure. So, for example, Patch Theatre, the company I was with, is doing a season in August, a very extensive season of a work we made 16 years ago, and it still stands up. So what I'm saying is that creative processes can be quick, and I'd love to talk about that, because I think there's a business paradigm for creativity and there's an arts paradigm for creativity, and they support different sorts of creativity, and I'd love to talk with you about that. I always feel as though I've got to defend the children's theatre world, because it's a world where serious players are making very serious and beautiful work.
So what can, I'm going to call it grown-up theatre, forgive me, but what can other theatre or indeed adult creators learn? I think what you're saying is something very special about children's theatre, and the energy and work that goes into planning and devising gives the outputs longevity. And there must be something we can learn from that. If adult creativity, adult theatre is more ephemeral or more temporary, what can we learn?
Well, I think the theatre process that we undertake is based on slow brewing.
Yeah.
It's based on 7 creative principles that I've devised really over the last 40 years to frame the way we think about what we do. And it's interesting because you often talk about the default domain
it's default network,
network. And one of the creative principles that we really strongly adhere to is the principle of the tension of whimsy and logic. They're my terms. So whimsy is fanciful, playful endeavor. Getting into a room and playing with a whole lot of objects without really having a clear notion of where the play is going to go. So it's very open-ended. And logic is the other side of that binary. And so I would say in our processes, I know that in our processes, whimsy is the generator of content. And we spend a lot of time generating content without knowing what the outcome is going to be. And we discover what the outcome is retrospectively. So we call it retrospective meaning making. So we've got this whimsical phase of our process. Now, it's a bias towards whimsy. It's not, we know that we flip between those two domains, if you like, all the time. But in terms of a process, we dedicate a whole lot of time to simply playing and generating fragments, generating segments, generating snippets that become segments, segments that become scenes, without knowing how they all fit together. So we get this massive work. So in the podcast, the experiment that we did, we had an animating idea. The animating idea was Explore 7. Now, why? Because I happened to be doing a project at the same time that was using that animating idea. And so what the animating idea is really not very important, so long as it's open and it prompts us to explore possibility. And so that animating idea became the framework for 2.5 years of accumulation of material for the Seven World podcast experiment. We spent 2.5 years making songs, song snippets, sketches, videos, lots and lots of material. And we accumulated all that material onto a website, which we called sevenworld.org. And that wasn't a public website. There wasn't an intention that we wanted to reach out and let you know what we were doing. It was just purely for a storage place for us. And after 2.5 years of the whimsical accumulation of material, where we just allowed ourselves to have a whole lot of fun around this idea of exploring 7, we came to a point where we said, okay, are we going to continue this? So the next stage of continuing, I wanted to continue. So the next stage was, okay, let's apply logic to this accumulation of material. And so we started to a way to coalesce this material into something that was going to be meaningful to people other than ourselves. And so that process then became, we limited the palette, if you like, which is another one of our principles, which was we decided to make a podcast. And at that stage, we didn't even know what the podcast was. We just wanted to accumulate this, coalesce this material into a podcast that would make sense to somebody else. And it ended up being a podcast over a period of time that it became a podcast that was about the making of itself, about this process of making and how our 7 principles of creativity applied to this process. So it's a weird meta world of making and then exploring what we're making as we're making it.
That sounds good in my head in Dave.
Yes.
Actually, it sounds a bit like the Seinfeld episode episode about nothing or, about them. But anyway, I just wanted to, there's 2 things I wanted to sort of touch on. Secondly, we'll come back to it. What are the principles? But I think the other thing that I was really interested in, you said earlier before you started talking about this process, you said that basically, the process that you are involved in tends to be a long process, but creativity, can be more spontaneous. And you said you'd like to talk about that. I'm really interested in that because, I come from a world of architecture. That's a long gestation, probably more logic than whimsical. And by the way, I love that differentiation between the whimsy and the logic, and something that's never before. But as an artist, I'm more in the in the whimsical sort of phase.
Yeah.
So I'm just interested in your sort of take. You said you wanted to talk about this more spontaneous.
Yeah. So it was interesting because when I knew that I was going to be talking to you, I thought, well, there's going to be a lot of people who are in the business world of creativity. And I started thinking about that. And I was going to say right up front that I'm not a business creative. I make art. I have run organisations, but they were not-for-profit arts organisations. So my creativity's been in the service of making something, a show, a performance, an experience, not in the service of a bottom line. What I can offer is that different lens. I think And creativity is one of those words that means different things to different people, and they're all right. It's a little bit like the word God or the word consciousness. It means different things to different people, and everybody's right about that. It's whatever you need it to mean. And I would say that the sort of creativity we often see expressed in business contexts is different from the sort of creativity we see in art making. I feel that business is largely concerned with the commodification of ideas for profit, and I'm not making any judgment about that. I just think it's an economic paradigm, whereas artists are largely concerned with the making of meaning. It's a cultural paradigm. And so different creative incentives tend to be serviced by different types of creative temperaments. And I love this story about Bob Dylan and Leonard Cohen getting together and they were being interviewed. And Dylan asked Cohen how long Hallelujah, the Hallelujah song took to write. And Cohen thought for a bit and he said, about 10 years, I guess. He'd written 80 verses, and the successful Jeff Buckley version kept 4 of those. So Dylan smiled wryly and he said his epic song, Blowing in the Wind, took him 15 minutes. So both songs are legendary. And I call Dylan's creativity lightning rod creativity. And I call Cohen's creativity slow brewing or slow brewed creativity. And both methods produced greatness. And it's interesting that there's this economist at the University of Chicago, David Gallinson. He spent 20 years studying these 2 very different creative dispositions. He had different sort of academic names for them, but I like the lightning rods. They're the creators who seem to be able to tap into some kind of inspirational source and manifest their ideas and visions quickly. And some of the famous ones are Pablo Picasso, Orson Welles, Albert Einstein, Bob Dylan. And others accumulate content over long periods of time, like Leonard Cohen, and are able to ultimately coalesce meaning from the mess retrospectively. And I call them slow brewers. And that's what I am. And a lot of independents are. And it's a type of creativity that we delve deeply into with this 7 World Creativity Project.
Dave, I'm fascinated to ask. You said you spent, I think, 2.5 years exploring this idea of 7. And for people listening and not watching, Dave is wearing this fantastic hat adorned with rainbow 7s all around it. So clearly it's been a big theme. And I'm wondering what kind of bravery it takes to pursue something as abstract as 7, let's say, for 2.5 years. I can imagine myself getting bored after 2.5 minutes, or at least frustrated after 2.5 minutes.
7 minutes, Chris.
Excuse me. So it would be 7 minutes, or maybe 7 seconds. Who knows? But you 2.5 years. How do you maintain momentum? How keeps you going?
You've got to remember that that's just an animating idea. That's just an invitation to explore. So as soon as you start that, as soon as you talk about 7, you think, okay, 7 colours of the rainbow. How did that come to be? Well, Newton decided that there would be 7 colours in the rainbow. There's actually infinite number of colours in the rainbow, but he decided there was 7 because 7 was a mystical and magical number at that time. And he hypothesized that there was a relationship between when he split white light into the 7, what he saw as the 7 colours of the rainbow. He hypothesized that there was a relationship, scientific relationship, between colour and music, because there are 7 notes in the diatonic music scale. So, 7 became, a guide for him to hypothesize a relationship that God doesn't actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs, for example.
7 dwarfs, the 7 chakras of the, there's so many, the 7 days of the week, the seven continents. I could go on forever. But you start digging into anything, any prompt that you offer, and you start opening worlds of fascination and wonder.
I love that phrase. It's an invitation. The reason I'm interested is I think business wants that lightning bolt the whole time, and they may be missing out on a huge opportunity because they insist on the lightning bolt. And if people were given permission, or perhaps had the courage to think of an idea as an inspiration, an invitation, that they can explore and play with and so on, then there could be a whole lot more innovation in business. It's fascinating insight.
Yes, but business has quarterly reports, and they have to meet bottom lines, and it's a different world. I've got a friend, Matthew Wilder, who is a lightning rod creator, and he wrote the songs for the Disney movie Mulan, and he had the 80s hit, Ain't Nothing Gonna Break My Stride, Ain't Nothing Gonna Hold. Do you know that one?
It rings a bell.
So he just had a musical stiletto produced on the West End. It took him 37 years to get it produced, but he wrote it, the first iteration of it, in 6 months. He said it just poured out of him. And that's the way he works. He taps into something and out it comes. And I'm in awe of that sort of talent. And he just doesn't understand the process that, we undertake to make our art. He just doesn't get it. And I can understand that. I don't get how he does it. And I suppose, Paul, you were in that midstream where you're doing sort of both and juggling both as an architect.
As an architect and an artist, actually, it's something that's very interesting that you said there I want to get to, but I wanted to share a definition of creativity that I've adapted or adopted. It came from a previous guest of ours, Kahuna, who hails from New Jersey. And he said that he got this definition of creativity because he was starting this thing. He wanted a definition. Creativity is, a paraphrase, identifying an opportunity and then fostering it.
Yeah.
And I love that because it basically, you think about anything, whether it's artistry or business or in your life, it's a great definition of creativity. So I really like that. I was just listening to you talking about, that guy writing that play or your musical and it pouring out of him. I know that in my process, and it doesn't always happen, but quite often, I think I'm procrastinating, but I'm not really. And I think about this particular applies to painting and to writing to a lesser degree. And I will play with an image in my mind for a long time. I think about it. And then if I go to the canvas, it'll come out so quickly and almost with no control in me.
Yeah.
And a couple of times I've stood back and been astounded and never been able to recreate it because it was just right to the last minute, but it was all about, so it actually was both the things you're talking about. There was a gestation period, sort of reversed the way you're doing the whimsical and then the logic. It was sort of like a gestation, then it comes out. So can you comment on that in your processes or observations?
Yeah, look, I think you're totally tapping into the whimsy, into the default domain network. You're seeding an idea, you're animating idea. You've got this sort of inclination, and you're letting it sit in your mind and ruminating on it. And the unconscious reverie is generating, without you knowing it, a sense of something that is going to emerge and spew out onto the canvas. And we see this happening all the time. And it is about honoring the dream state, or about honoring the you know, in a way, that's your slow brewing moment, you know, your whimsical moment.
Yeah, no, look, I do like it, and the way you explain that, because I was sort of thinking in the painting as a creative act, but in reality, it is the technical aspect. You know,
It's an expression of what's happening in your brain. Yeah.
yeah, you know, it's a physical thing of putting what's in my brain onto paper, so that it becomes the logic. So yeah, look, that's brilliant.
Dave, your work is focused on kids, and I'm guessing it's very easy to get kids. I don't mean easy. I mean, kids are really open to the idea of creativity and the idea of being whimsical and so on. You can say, here's a giraffe that's flying to the moon and we're all yellow today, or anything, you know, and they'll go with that. What goes wrong when we're teenagers? How can we preserve more of that, I guess?
Okay, so I've got some fairly strong opinions on this, I can tell you. Firstly, I could say that the kids have no preconception of what theatre is, and so they're very open to the possibilities of what theatre can be. That's a really great starting point, and that's why a lot of artists love being in this, because it gives them a whole level of artistic freedom that they don't necessarily have if they're producing work for adults. The second thing is that we live in a world that is ruled by logic. You know, it is strongly biased towards logic. I'd love to there's a quote that I've got here I'd love to read. It's from Fritjof Capra, and this book was written in the 70s, and I think this observation still holds true even more so today. He suggests that contemporary culture has consistently favoured logic over intuition, facts over fantasy, knowledge over imagination, competition over cooperation, expansion over conservation, and the scientific over the spiritual. Logic dominates. Why? Because logic is much easier to deal with. It's solid and reliable. You know what you're getting. You can measure it and grade it. So it works well for educational institutions, businesses, and policymakers. People feel in control with logic. It feels safe. It is safe. The travesty is that without whimsy, creativity is stuck drum.
Yeah.
And that's very true. If you just approach everything from a logical perspective, you get what you already know. You're working at a conscious level. If you're working with whimsy, you're working for the millions of bits of information you absorb without being conscious of it. And that's what you're drawing from.
Is it fair to say, one thought went through my mind as you were speaking is, so what, you know, surely logic's better than whimsy and so on and so on. And then I thought to a discussion we have about AI a lot, which is computers do logic much better than humans do logic. And therefore the onus is on us, not just to embrace whimsy, but to kind of recognize that whimsy is something that only humans can do. And therefore it's important to us to embrace that.
Yeah. And I think I don't want to suggest that whimsy without logic is a good thing. Whimsy is just chaotic, you know. You actually need the two, but there's a cultural bias towards logic and away from whimsy. That the notion that whimsy is a bit hippie, it's unreliable, it's not solid, you can't measure it, whereas logic you can. And let's face it, the logical side of our brain thinks it knows it all, you know, is very confident about its outcomes, whereas the whimsical side of our brains is very open and intuitive and shifting and in flight, really. So I think that for me, a simple equation for creativity would be whimsy plus logic in that order, where whimsy is creating the content and logic is organizing that content coalescing it into meaningful outcomes, is creativity. And that one can't do without the other. You can't have creativity without those two aspects, even when it happens at a fast rate, as it happens with the lightning rods. They're also undertaking that, but at a much faster rate. But also the slow brewers, the outcomes from slow brewers tend to be more different. They tend to be more deeper and more layered. And so those two different types of creativity produce two different sorts of outcomes.
Dave, we're nearing the end, but before we ask our last question, can you give us a quick summation of the 7 principles?
Yeah, the 7. I'm dying to know. I think you know one, which was logic and whimsy. You mentioned a limited palette. We got 2. Any more?
Yeah, look, I can give you a really quick summary, but let me say that these aren't formulaic in any way. You can't really understand or comprehend them outside of a process, which is what the podcast is all about. The podcast is about I tried to write a book on these 7 principles, and I just thought, I read it and it was boring. And that's because it really was. And that's because you can't have these foundational principles without being inside a project and applying them and comprehending them and seeing how they work and seeing how they're just a very loose guide. It's like the foundations of a house. It sits under something. It doesn't,
They're more than a loose guide. As an architect, I'm going to say, if your foundations are only a loose guide, you're in trouble. We take your disclaimer. Give us the 7.
You've spoiled everything. Okay, very quickly, the animating idea I've said, simple open-ended prompt that ignites creative exploration and content generation. The tension of whimsy and logic, we've talked about that. Begin with whimsical play and intuitive creation, then apply logical organisation and refinement. Both elements are crucial and must be deployed in this order, but also you're flip-flopping between those two things all the time. Because whenever you create something, you're always thinking, oh, where does that fit? How does that, what does that mean? Limitation is liberation. So this is limiting the palette. Constraints foster creativity by focusing exploration and forcing innovation within defined boundaries. We limit our palette. We discover extraordinary possibilities within ordinary things. That the 7 is limiting the palette. We did a 3-year project using paper receipt rolls, and the possibilities that came out of that were amazing, incredible. We created 3 individual performance works internationally with that simple idea. Snippets, segments, scenes and scenarios is the 4th creative principle. You gather content through sustained exploration, allowing patterns and connections to emerge organically. The meaning emerges retrospectively. That's a lot of people who apply this process fall foul at that point where they just lose faith. They can't hold on to the whimsical phase long enough to create enough content the content has to speak back to you. It has to lead you to seeing that far off star that you're heading towards. You have to be able to get a sense of it before you go there. So the meaning emerges retrospectively as content accumulates and patterns reveal themselves. It's Paul's painting process. Slow brewing. This is a big one for me as a slow brewer, but not possibly for the lightning rods. True creativity requires patience, persistence, perspiration, and perseverance. There's actually 7 Ps. I call them the 7 Ps in the pod. Give ideas time to develop fully rather than rushing to a premature resolution. Trust that elegant simplicity emerges from deep exploration. And I love that term, elegant simplicity. Yeah. And by that, I mean the simplicity that exists on the other side of complexity. Leonardo da Vinci has attributed this quote, "Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication." And I think real simplicity on the other side of is exactly that. Then number 6 is mapping and reflection. Use frameworks like, there's lots and lots of widgets, I call them, the double diamond design framework, the hero's journey, lots and lots of creativity frameworks that help you understand where you are and get you out of dead ends and situations where you're discombobulated. And discombobulation is a part of the process, and the frustration, anxiety, and all of that stuff that we all know so well. So mapping and reflection, I spend a lot of time just writing about where I'm at in a process, and regular reflection helps navigate the journey from chaos to coherence. And then finally, number 7 is, the collaboration, co-creation, participation, and partnerships. That creative work thrives through the interplay of different voices, perspectives, and talents. So they enable meaningful exchange between collaborators, creators, and audiences. So they're the 7 foundations.
I'm thinking if the book sounded boring, what about the kids' play? Surely that's a play with 7-minute segments and surely.
Yeah. Well, the podcast is just full of that sort of whimsical, when we tried to make something out of the accumulation of material, I spent literally 9 months discombobulated, where I just couldn't find a way through. I just couldn't work out where to go. I just sat in it. And eventually I broke it with a quote from Alex Miller, who said, that when he writes a novel, he only starts with a sort of very basic notion of where it's going, and he doesn't know what it is until he's done it. And it's always a surprise.
You give me, David, still you give me inspiration. Paul's a fantastic watercolor artist.
Yeah.
I'm more of a photographer, although I'm dabbling more on board with paints and else. But I have millions of photographs. You give me confidence that they may take me somewhere.
Absolutely, yeah, give it time. But you have to sow the seed, don't you? You have to say, how am I going to coalesce this? You have to say, take on that sort of logical and analytical stance of saying, okay, I've got to make this cohere in some way.
Dave, we've come to the end. As surprising as it is, it's so quick. And look, I'd love to talk further. Can you just give our listeners one thing, just one other thing, not 7, just one, just advice or
Yeah. All of that information about the networks that helped us understand what creativity is happened in the early part of 2000, from about 1997 to about 2008. And yet we've known about that for a long, long while. And I think a good indication of that is a quote by Albert Einstein. The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honours the servant and forgotten the gift.
It's a great moment to finish. That's got me thinking very deeply. How do we unwind all of that?
Who knows? Thanks for having me on, and Paul and Chris too, if you're interested, because I know you're writing a book as well.
That's right.
I'm doing a short series called What Are You Working On? And I'd love to interview you both individually. Into your heads.
Mine has a cookie name. It's called The Spice Project.
Yes, I know.
And it's about adding spice to the way you think. So we're all on the same subject of creativity. And
I love your podcast. I think it's doing a great service.
Thank you, especially this episode.
Thanks for having us on for a bit of whimsy.
Okay, thanks, guys.
Right, Chris. Wow, that's.
I think there are about 19 principles of creativity I've got out there, but I mean the big ones, the idea of whimsy plus logic, the idea of a limited palette, the idea of mapping and reflecting. What amazing stuff. I don't know if I'm happy or sad that the book was so boring. It seems like it's got to get out there somehow.
Well, look, Chris, on that on his website, 7 Wells, he has the principles there, very concise, probably concise that he spoke about it. But I got to say, he really, it's like one of those songs that you get in your head you can't get out.
Yeah.
I'm seeing the 7s now, like those, 7 Up, Channel 7, 7 Veils, as I said before.
Yeah.
7 Brides for 7 Brothers. My God, it's just, it's going to drive me nuts. How would you, they're doing it for years. It's just endless.
And that he spent 2.5 years on this one topic of 7. He mentioned another project that ran for years on till receipts. It just shows how much creative opportunity there is everywhere. And if anybody's ever thinking, I'm not creative, you are surrounded by creative opportunities. Even that till receipt in a wallet is a creative opportunity.
It's hard to say they even have 7 opportunities, Chris.
7 opportunities. I think
as a minimum.
So I hope you've liked listening to this week's show. If you have, you know what to do. Hit follow, please. Make sure you get notified of future episodes. Tell your friends if you want to give us a rating. Of course, we'd love that. But most of all, spread the word. Let other people know about the Common Creative Podcast.
Yes, look, without a doubt. And that's that rating of 5-star, which Chris didn't mention. It's not 5-star. Obviously, it's just
A day.
For taking some time out of his day to share with us his insights. So yeah, great stuff. Join us next week.
See you next week. Bye for now.
Bye.